I'm 28. I built that house from age 22 to 28. Every single brick, every wire, every pipe, every nail. Over $80,000 of my own money from working two jobs. Let me back up because you need to understand how this happened. My parents always treated my sister Paige differently. She was the baby, born when I was 6. And from day one, my mom made it clear that Paige was special, and I was just the practice kid. When I got straight A's, my mom said, "Good job." When Paige got C's, my mom threw her a party for trying her best. This was my entire childhood. When I was 22, my parents told me they wanted to build a house on land. My grandfather left them, but they couldn't afford construction costs. My dad sat me down at their kitchen table and said if I helped build it and covered materials, they'd put my name on the deed alongside theirs. We'd be co-owners. I was young and stupid, and I wanted so badly to finally matter to them that I said yes. This is the setup for a masterclass in how to exploit your own child. And I need y'all to understand something. This man didn't just agree to help. He agreed because somewhere in his brain there was still that little kid thinking, maybe this time they'll finally see me. That's not stupidity. That's trauma doing what trauma does. It finds the one thing you've been starving for your whole life, and it dangles it right in front of you. His parents knew exactly which button to press. They'd been programming that button for 22 years. 6 years of my life. I learned plumbing from YouTube and library books. I taught myself electrical. I poured the foundation over 3 weekends. I worked my regular job from 7 to 3, then drove to the property and worked until midnight most days. My dad showed up maybe once a month to hand me a soda and tell me I was doing good work. My mom visited twice in 6 years. Twice. Paige never lifted a finger. She was too busy with her boyfriend Leroy, who hasn't held a job longer than 4 months since I've known him. They lived in my parents' cramped apartment the whole time, complaining about not having space while I was literally building them space with my bare hands. 6 years. Do you understand what 6 years of learning trades from YouTube while working full-time actually looks like? This man aged out of his 20s on a construction site building a future for people who couldn't even be bothered to show up and watch. And Paige, is somewhere complaining about square footage while her brother is out there turning himself into a one-man construction company. The audacity to complain about space to the person actively creating space for you. That's not entitlement, that's a whole different species of delusion. The weekend I installed the last doorknob, my parents invited me over for dinner. I thought they were finally going to acknowledge what I did. Instead, my mom told me Paige and Leroy needed the house because Paige might be pregnant soon and they're starting a real family. She said I'm 28 and single, so I don't need all that space. My dad laughed and said I should consider it back rent for 18 years of raising me. I asked about the deed, about my name, about the promise. My dad said they never actually filed any paperwork with my name. It was always just theirs. He said I should have gotten that in writing and maybe I'll learn to be smarter next time. Paige was already there. She was leaning against my kitchen counter sipping wine, and she thanked me for the free labor and said the master bedroom I designed turned out amazing. Leroy was in the driveway revving his car in my garage saying, "Yeah, bro, appreciate it." I need everyone to sit with this image for a second. This man just installed the last doorknob. The project of his 20s is done. He walks into what he thinks is a celebration dinner and instead walks into a fully coordinated ambush. Paige is already there. She's already comfortable. She's already sipping wine in his kitchen like she's settling into a hotel room. They didn't even have the decency to pretend for 5 minutes. They had this whole speech rehearsed. The back rent for raising you line? That wasn't off the cuff. That was a prepared legal defense disguised as a joke. These people sat around a table and workshopped how to rob their son and make him feel like he deserved it. I didn't say anything. I walked out. I got in my truck and I drove away, and I made a decision right there in that driveway. I wasn't going to heal from this. I wasn't going to move on. I was going to spend however long it took to make sure they felt exactly what they did to me. That was 11 months ago. I've spent every single day since then preparing, saving, planning, documenting everything about that house and what I put into it. And then last Thursday, my mom called me for the first time in 11 months. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her now. She kept saying, "Please come home. We need to talk. There's been a situation." I didn't answer, but I smiled, because I knew exactly what the situation was. I'll explain in the update what I set in motion and what happened to make them finally call. But trust me when I say this wasn't karma. This wasn't the universe. This was me. Update 1. Alright, so a lot of you asked what exactly I did during those 11 months and what made my family suddenly desperate to talk to me. Here's what happened. When I built that house, I did everything myself. Electrical, plumbing, foundation, framing, all of it. And here's the thing about doing construction work yourself on a property you don't own. You're supposed to pull permits. You're supposed to get inspections. My parents told me not to bother because permits cost money and inspections take time, and they trusted me to do it right. I did do it right. But I also kept every single receipt, every photo, every video I took while working. 6 years of documentation sitting in folders on my laptop and backed up to the cloud. 3 weeks after they kicked me out, I walked into the county building department and I filed a complaint. I told them there was a newly occupied residence at that address with 0 permits on record for any of the major work done. Electrical, plumbing, structural. Nothing was ever inspected or approved. Y'all, this man was playing chess while his family was playing checkers with missing pieces. They told him to skip permits to save money. Their money, by the way, which was actually his money. And they thought they were being clever. They thought they were cutting corners. What they were actually doing was handing their son a loaded weapon and then forgetting he had it. 6 years of receipts. 6 years of time-stamped photos. This man built a legal case while he was building their house. The documentation wasn't paranoia. It was prophecy. Some part of him always knew. The county sent inspectors in January. My parents had been living in the house for about 2 months at that point because, yeah, they moved in too. Paige and Leroy took the master bedroom I designed, and my parents took one of the smaller rooms. One big happy family in the house I built with my hands and my money. The inspectors found exactly what I knew they would find. Unpermitted electrical work throughout the entire structure. Unpermitted plumbing. No certificate of occupancy. The house was never legally approved for anyone to live in. They got a notice. They had 90 days to either bring everything up to code with proper permits and inspections or vacate the property. The cost to retrofit everything correctly with licensed contractors was estimated at over $40,000. Exposed the walls, hire licensed electricians to redo the work to current code, licensed plumbers, new inspections, the whole thing. My parents don't have $40,000. They never had money for anything, which is why I paid for the original construction. Paige and Leroy definitely don't have money. Leroy doesn't even have a job right now. So now you understand why my mom called crying last Thursday. The 90 days were almost up. They were facing the reality that they either had to come up with money they don't have or move out of the house entirely. $40,000 to fix a house that cost $80,000 to build. And who has that money? Nobody in that house. Not the parents who couldn't afford construction. Not Paige, who's never contributed anything. Definitely not Leroy, who treats employment like a seasonal hobby. The only person who ever had money was the one they kicked out. They're drowning in a house they stole, and the only life raft is the person they threw overboard. That's not irony. That's architecture. This man didn't just build a house. He built a trap and waited for them to move in. My dad tried calling me twice after my mom's call. I didn't answer those either. Then Paige started texting me. She went from, "Hey, we need to talk," to, "Why are you ignoring us?" to, "I know you're behind this, you petty piece of garbage," in about 3 hours. I saved all of those messages too, but I'm not done. The permit situation was just the first part. There's more that I set up, and I'll explain in the next update because honestly, this is getting long, and I need to process what happened when I finally did respond to them. Because I did eventually respond, just not in the way they expected. 3 hours. Paige went from, "Hey, we need to talk," to "petty piece of garbage." In 3 hours. That's not a person trying to reconcile. That's a person who's mad their victim stopped being convenient. And she's texting this to a man who has been meticulously saving everything for almost a year. She's adding evidence to the pile while calling him petty. Every message she sends is another receipt. At this point, she's basically doing his legal prep work for him. Update 2. So I finally responded to them, but not through text or phone. I showed up at the house on Saturday morning. I wanted to see their faces. I wanted them to say everything they had to say directly to me so there would be no confusion about where we stood. All 4 of them were there. My parents, Paige, Leroy. They were sitting in the living room I framed with my own hands, surrounded by walls I drywalled and painted. My mom immediately started crying and asking why I would do this to my own family. My dad just stared at me like he was trying to figure out if I was really his son. I told them I didn't do anything. The county requires permits and inspections for occupied structures. I simply informed the county that their house had neither. Everything that happened after that was the consequence of their choice to skip proper procedures. My dad stood up and got in my face and said I knew exactly what I was doing, and I was trying to destroy this family over a misunderstanding. I asked him what misunderstanding. He said they never promised me ownership, they just said they'd appreciate my help. I reminded him of the exact words he used at their kitchen table 6 years ago. "I'd put your name right next to ours on the deed, son. We'll own it together as a family." He said I misheard him. Why would you do this to your own family? Family. She said family. Ma'am, where was family when your son was working until midnight every night? Where was family when you visited twice in 6 years? Where was family when you laughed about back rent? Family is a word they only remember when they need something. And the dad? The audacity of this man to gaslight his son about a specific quote from 6 years ago. You misheard me. Brother, your son remembers the exact words because they were the most important words anyone ever said to him. He's been replaying that moment for 6 years. He could probably tell you what temperature it was outside and what you were wearing. Paige jumped in and called me delusional. She said I was always jealous of her, and this was just me being bitter because I have no life and no girlfriend and nothing going on. Leroy nodded along like he had any right to have an opinion about anything. I stayed calm the entire time. I told them I had something else to share. During those 11 months, I also consulted with a lawyer about filing a civil suit against them for the value of my labor and materials. 6 years of work. Over $80,000 in documented expenses. Exposed walls that prove I installed the electrical and plumbing myself. A lawyer told me I have a very strong case for unjust enrichment. My mom grabbed my arm and begged me not to do this. She said they're family, and we don't sue family. I asked her if family steals 6 years of someone's life and $80,000 and then laughs about it. She didn't answer. We don't sue family. Oh, now there's rules? Now there's a family code of conduct? Because I must have missed the chapter about not exploiting your firstborn for free labor and then kicking them out of the house they built. Funny how the rulebook only comes out when they're the ones facing consequences. And Paige calling him jealous. Girl, jealous of what? Your unemployed boyfriend? Your inability to do literally anything for yourself? The only thing anyone could be jealous of is your complete lack of self-awareness because that level of delusion must be peaceful. My dad tried a different approach. He said, fine, maybe they handled it wrong, but we can work something out. He said if I drop this whole thing and help them pay for the repairs, they'll add my name to the deed like they originally planned. He said we can put this behind us. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud in that living room. I told him the time for that offer was 11 months ago. I told him I wasn't interested in being on a deed with people who would cheat their own son. I told them I'd give them 2 weeks to decide. Either they sign the entire property over to me and I drop the lawsuit, or we go to court and I take whatever the judge decides, plus they still lose the house to the county. Then I left. And that's when things got really interesting because they didn't just sit there and accept it. They started fighting back. I'll explain what they tried to do in the final update. This man looked his father in the eye and laughed in the house he built, surrounded by people who betrayed him. And that laugh wasn't crazy. That laugh was the sound of someone who finally realized they have all the power. Dad tried to offer the same deal that started this whole thing, like his son is still that desperate 22-year-old begging for approval. Read the room, old man. You're negotiating from a sinking ship with the guy who drilled the hole. The audacity to say, help us pay for repairs. You're asking him to pay twice for the same house he's not allowed to live in. Final update. So here's what they tried to do. My dad went to the county and tried to claim he did all the work himself. He thought if he took responsibility for the unpermitted construction, they couldn't come after him as harshly since he's the property owner. Problem is, I had 6 years of photos and videos with timestamps showing me doing every single piece of work. My face, my hands, my truck in the background. The county wasn't interested in his lies. Paige tried a different approach. She sent me a long message saying she was sorry and she didn't realize how much I sacrificed and could we please talk like siblings. I didn't respond. 2 days later, she sent another message calling me every name she could think of and saying I was tearing the family apart over jealousy. That's the sister I know. The 2 weeks passed. They didn't sign anything over. I think they genuinely believed I was bluffing. The dad tried to steal the credit. Again. After everything, this man walked into a government building and tried to claim he built a house he visited once a month to hand out sodas. He's so committed to the lie that he'd rather commit fraud than admit his son did something he couldn't. And Paige, 2 days. She held the apology act together for 2 days before the mask came off. That apology was never real. It was a tactic. The second it didn't work, she went right back to her factory settings of entitlement and name-calling. Some people can't even pretend to be decent for a full week. I filed the lawsuit. Unjust enrichment. I submitted every receipt, every photo, bank statements showing the withdrawals I made to pay for materials, text messages from 6 years ago where my dad thanked me for picking up lumber and electrical supplies. The paper trail was massive because I'm not an idiot, and I knew even back then that something felt wrong about how eager they were to let me do everything. The county deadline hit 3 days after I filed. They had to vacate. 4 adults with nowhere to go because none of them planned for anything. My parents moved into their old apartment, which they'd been renting out. The tenants had to leave with 30 days' notice, which caused its own problems. Paige and Leroy had no options. Leroy's family won't take them in because they know he's useless. Paige burned bridges with most of her friends years ago. 4 adults with zero backup plans. These people lived their entire lives assuming someone else would handle the consequences. The parents assumed their son would always be there to exploit. Paige assumed she'd always be bailed out. Leroy assumed. Honestly, I don't know what Leroy assumes because I'm not sure he thinks at all. They spent 28 years building a family dynamic where one person does everything and 3 people coast. And they never once considered what happens when that one person stops playing along. The system they built only worked because he let it work. Now he doesn't. And they're shocked. My dad is currently sleeping in his truck in parking lots. I know this because my mom told me in one of her 17 voicemails. She keeps saying he won't come inside anywhere because he's ashamed. He sits there for hours just staring at nothing. She's been calling relatives we haven't spoken to in over a decade, begging for someone to help them. Paige calls me multiple times a day now. Her voice is completely wrecked from crying. She keeps saying, please just pick up, we'll do whatever you want, just tell us what you want. Leroy tried calling once and I actually answered just to hear what he'd say. He stuttered for about 10 seconds and then hung up. Last week my mom left a voicemail saying they'll sign the property over. They'll do it right now. They'll transfer everything if I just drop the lawsuit and let them have some peace. The dad who told his son to consider 6 years of work back rent is now sleeping in his truck because he's too ashamed to face anyone. The shame he should have felt when he betrayed his son. He's feeling it now, alone, in a parking lot. And Paige calling multiple times a day with a wrecked voice? She's experiencing 1 month of desperation after putting her brother through 6 years of being invisible. The math doesn't even come close to balancing out. And Leroy, my man called, had no script, stuttered, and hung up. That's a guy who has never once in his life had to handle anything himself. 10 seconds of accountability and he collapsed. I haven't responded yet. I'm letting them sit in it for a while longer. The same way I sat in that driveway 11 months ago, realizing my own family saw me as nothing but free labor. Some of you might think I'm being cruel. Maybe I am. But they had 6 years to treat me like family. They had 11 months to apologize before it got to this point. They chose to laugh at me instead. They chose to call me ungrateful. They chose Paige every single time. Now they're finally learning what it costs to throw away someone who would have done anything for them. I'll probably accept the property transfer eventually. But not yet. Not until they understand that I'm not the desperate kid begging for their approval anymore. They built that dynamic for 28 years. I'm just finally returning the favor.